The original black Jews. The story of Abraham, a key figure in the Bible, is often told without recognizing an important detail. He was a man of color, specifically a black man. This raises some interesting questions. If Abraham was black, why are many modern-day Israelites not people of color? Why don't they have black skin? In the book The Original Black Jews by Windsor Rudolph R. from 1935, the author points out that the original Israelites were black and that Abraham, also known as Abram, was a black Shemite, a descendant of Shem. Abraham is significant because he is considered the father of both the Hebrew Israelites and Arab nations. The Hebrew Israelites trace their roots through Jacob, while the Arab nations come from Ishmael, Abraham's first son with Hagar, an Egyptian woman. According to biblical scriptures, both groups were destined to become great nations. The black Shemites mixed with black Hamite Egyptian women, leading to the formation of the Arab nation. Interestingly, Arabia was first home to Ethiopians, also known as Cushites, before the Arabs arrived. The story of King Solomon and the Queen of Sheba adds another layer to this history. The Queen of Sheba returned to her land with her son Menelik I after visiting Solomon in Jerusalem. Menelik later went back to Jerusalem for an education and adopted the name David. Many believe that the Jews who traveled back to Ethiopia with Menelik are ancestors of the modern-day black Jews in Ethiopia known as Falashas. Historically, there was a united kingdom of Israel under leaders like Saul, David, and Solomon, but scholars debate how extensive this kingdom really was. Some believe archaeological evidence doesn't support a large kingdom existing before the late 8th century BCE. As we explore this topic further, it's essential to consider that while ancient Israelites had African roots, many modern Israelis are of European descent, particularly Ashkenazi Jews who migrated from Central and Eastern Europe in the 20th century. This brings us to a complex issue regarding identity and race today in Israel, where being labeled as white Israelis can mean different things depending on social and political contexts. One group that falls under the category of white Israelis is the Ashkenazi Jews, who have roots in Europe. Ashkenazi Jews. Back in the 8th century, there was a powerful empire called the Khazar Empire, located in what we now know as Eastern Europe, stretching from Ukraine to Kazakhstan. The Khazars were an important people, controlling major trade routes like the Silk Road. Around 740 CE, their king Bulin decided to convert to Judaism, and many of his followers did too. This shift likely happened because Jewish traders introduced their beliefs to the Khazar leaders. The Khazars built a Jewish kingdom with its capital in Ail, which is now Astrakhan in Russia. This kingdom became a center for Jewish learning and culture, attracting scholars from all over. Over time, the Khazar Jews developed their own unique traditions by blending Jewish customs with those of Turkish and Slavic cultures. However, by the 10th century, the Khazar Empire began to decline due to conflicts and pressures from neighboring nations. Many Khazar Jews moved westward to places like Poland and Lithuania, where they joined existing Jewish communities. This migration marked the start of what we call Ashkenazi Jewry today. During the Middle Ages, some European groups like the Normans and Saxons also converted to Judaism, adding to the Ashkenazi population. These new converts brought their own customs and languages, which enriched Ashkenazi culture. As they settled in different areas, they mixed with local populations and adopted various traditions. Ashkenazi Jews developed their own religious practices too. They often used Hebrew and Aramaic in their prayers. Although Hebrew was mainly a sacred language for many years, it saw a revival in the 20th century as a common language in Israel. Throughout history, Ashkenazi Jews have made significant contributions to philosophy, literature, art, music, and science in Europe. In fact, while they were only about 3% of the world's Jewish population back in the 11th century, they grew to make up around 92% by 1930. Sadly, This population faced a tragic decline during the Holocaust when millions were killed during World War II. Before this dark time, there were about 15 million Jews worldwide. Today, it's estimated that around 80% of Jews are Ashkenazi. Recent studies show that Ashkenazi Jews have a diverse ancestry that includes roots from the Middle East and Europe. This mix reflects their long history of migration and intermarriage. While Ashkenazi culture flourished in Europe, the arrival of Sephardic Jews from Spain and Portugal brings another dimension to the Jewish experience in Palestine. Sephardic Jews. In the late 1800s and early 1900s, a group of Jews known as Sephardic Jews, who came from Spain and Portugal, started moving to Palestine. At that time, Palestine was controlled by the Ottoman Empire. These Sephardic Jews were looking for a place where they could practice their religion freely and escape from persecution they faced in their home countries. As more people began to support the idea of creating a Jewish homeland, even more Sephardic Jews arrived in Palestine, excited to start new lives. However, they faced some challenges. Many Ashkenazi Jews, who had come from Eastern Europe, looked down on them and considered them different, calling them Arab or Oriental Jews. Despite this discrimination, the Sephardic Jews built strong communities and cultural centers in Palestine. When Israel was established in 1948, things began to change for the Sephardic Jews. The new Israeli government focused on promoting European culture and heritage, which made many Sephardic Jews feel like they had to give up their own traditions. They were encouraged to stop speaking their Latino language and to leave behind their Middle Eastern customs, which were often seen as old-fashioned. As time went on, many Sephardic Jews started to see themselves as white and European instead of embracing their Middle Eastern and North African backgrounds. This change was influenced by Israel's focus on Western culture. Over the years, Sephardic Jews became known as white Israelis, which made it harder for them to remember their rich history and cultural roots. Transitioning from the experiences of Sephardic Jews, we now examine the challenges faced by Mizrahi Jews, who have roots in the Middle East and North Africa. Mizrahi Jews. When Israel was created in 1948, a lot of people were affected. Over 700,000 Palestinians had to leave their homes, but not everyone agreed with the reasons for this. Among those who questioned it were the Mizrahi Jews, who have roots in the Middle East and North Africa. Today, Mizrahi Jews are the largest ethnic group in Israel. Most Mizrahi Jews moved to Israel after it was founded. For a long time, they faced the same kind of negative attitudes that Palestinians did. In their home countries, like Iraq, Egypt, and Morocco, Mizrahi Jews had been respected and held important positions. But when they arrived in Israel, they found that the country was mostly run by Ashkenazi Jews, who came from Europe. Many Ashkenazi Jews viewed Mizrahi Jews as less sophisticated and looked down on their culture. As Mizrahi Jews tried to fit into Israeli society, they felt a lot of pressure to give up their traditions and customs. The government, schools, and media were mostly controlled by Ashkenazi Jews and promoted a European way of life. Mizrahi Jews were encouraged to adopt Ashkenazi customs and even change their language. Sadly, they were often portrayed as uncivilized or backward. Some even faced pressure to change their appearance, like getting surgeries to look more European. Many Mizrahi Jews began to see themselves as white Israelis, which made it harder for them to remember their rich Middle Eastern and North African backgrounds. This change wasn't just something that happened naturally, it was part of a system that discriminated against them and tried to erase their culture. Mizrahi thinkers noticed that their struggles were similar to those of Palestinians. They realized that both groups faced discrimination and unfair treatment. This idea led to a movement starting in the 1950s where Mizrahi Jews and Palestinians came together to support each other. They created joint magazines and organized protests side by side. This solidarity movement challenged the idea that Israel was just a villa in the jungle, showing that Jews and Palestinians could find ways to live together peacefully. It also helped people think more deeply about what it means to belong to a nation and how colonialism affects everyone in Israel/Palestine today. Following the narrative of Mizrahi Jews, we must also acknowledge the influx of immigrants from the former Soviet Union and other European countries, which has further shaped Israeli society. Immigrants from the former Soviet Union and other European countries. In the 1990s and 2000s, a large number of immigrants came to Israel from the former Soviet Union and other European countries like Russia, Ukraine, and Belarus. Many of these immigrants were Jewish or had Jewish ancestry, which allowed them to apply for Israeli citizenship under the law of return. They moved to Israel seeking safety, economic opportunities, and a chance to reconnect with their Jewish heritage, especially as they face political instability and anti-Semitism in their home countries. When they first arrived, these immigrants were often seen as outsiders in Israeli society. However, over time, as they adapted to life in Israel, they began to be viewed as white Israelis. This change was influenced by their European backgrounds, which aligned more closely with the dominant Ashkenazi culture. As they settled in Israel, many adopted Hebrew and learned about Jewish customs. Unfortunately, this often meant giving up their unique cultural identities to fit into what was seen as the standard Israeli way of life. Today, many of these immigrants identify as white Israelis, but may not fully understand the historical context of their identity. While Israeli society is not divided by race in the same way as in the U.S., issues of race and discrimination still exist. For example, in June 2019, Solomon Teka, an 18-year-old Israeli Jew of Ethiopian descent, was shot by a police officer, leading to protests against racism within Israel. This incident highlighted ongoing issues of police brutality and discrimination faced by Ethiopian Israelis, even those who have assimilated into society. Historically, blackness has been associated with discrimination in Israel. In the 1970s, Mizrahi Jews formed the Israeli Black Panther movement to protest against inequality. For them, blackness was a metaphor for being treated as outsiders despite being Jewish. In contrast, Ethiopian Israelis face real discrimination based on their skin color. Overall, the identity of white Israelis is complex and shaped by a mix of history, culture, and experiences. It reflects a rich heritage but also carries the weight of past injustices. As we explore these identities, it's crucial to recognize the diverse narratives within Israeli society, Ashkenazi, Mizrahi, Sephardi, and Palestinian, and work towards justice and coexistence for all people in the region. Thank you for joining us for this discussion. If you found this video insightful, please give it a thumbs up and share it with friends and family. We appreciate your support and look forward to seeing you in our next video.